Alsar Atelier is an architecture and design studio based in Boston and Bogotá that focuses on need-based and permanent designs and small-scale residential projects. The studio is now led by Alejandro Saldarriaga Rubio, and by prioritizing sustainable materials, strategies, and community engagement, the firm has successfully completed numerous projects across the many scales. Today, we are joined by Alejandro, the founder of Alsar Atelier, and we will be chatting about forging connections through community-centric architecture. So excited for our conversation.
Thank you for having me.
The pleasure is ours. So will you first tell us about your background and about the firm?
As mentioned before, I am Alejandro. I am Colombian. I was born and raised in Bogotá, Colombia, in the Colombian capital. I lived there most of my adult life. I did my undergrad there at the Universidad de los Andes. Shortly after graduation, I moved away to Europe and worked in Denmark for a year before applying to my master's degree at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. Reason why I'm currently living in Boston, I moved to do my master's in architecture, and then during that time in school, I started to find an interest in ephemeral design and also in socially oriented architecture. The best thing, or like the most unusual thing that happened to me during this time is that the pandemic was a blessing in disguise in my own path, as I decided to postpone my master's degree as I arrived to the GSD, or to the Graduate School of Design, at 2019. So I had one semester of in-person classes. Then the semester after was the full pandemic blowout. So I decided to go back to Colombia. And during that time was when I actually started practicing. For several years, I was or had been searching for opportunities to promote built work. I feel that I had done a lot of competition so far. None of them, some of them won, some of them lost, but I realized that none of them were helping me grow a lot as an independent architect. They were very recognized by my peers, but that's as far as they got. So I had an intuition that if it was built work that people who were not in design fields could relate to, maybe it could lead to something else. Then during the pandemic, in this specific context, the Colombian Society of Architects, which is an institution that supports young architects in the country, was creating this sort of micro opportunities for young designers to propose ideas on how to reactivate spaces within the pandemic context in the city of Bogotá. And that's where I proposed an idea that was of interest to the people there, to the city, and then the idea got built at the end of the day. I worked with a team of designers and a team of community engagement, and that's where I actually found very interesting the process of creating temporary pro bono architecture, being there firsthand. And after that, I just decided to keep working on these sort of projects. And led me to my interest also in academia, mostly because these projects, since they're very small scale and they are pro bono, they're not necessarily a sustainable financial method for an architectural practice in terms of economy. Like, they don't bring a lot of money, very, very straightforward. So, but they are very valued within academia as research. So currently I'm working at Northeastern University as a teaching and research fellow.
Cool. How do you highlight sustainable materials and community engagement in your project so far?
Okay, that's a good question. So in the pandemic, and this is not only something that happened to me, it's something that happened globally. Since it is a moment in which essentially all of the planet was in socioeconomic crisis, and everybody needed to extend their indoor spaces outside, it was very common for everyone to be recycling materials or getting materials that were free. which I think it was a very interesting part of this process, because in this scenario, specifically in this time, financial and environmental sustainability became one, right? As it's cheap to recycle materials. So I think in this period of time, a lot of methods of construction were catalyzed to create some sort of like new sustainable construction methods. That is one part. And then community engagement, definitely, at least for me, since Bogota is not a place where, even in the pandemic, online engagement is as easy, because not a lot of people have computers. So the one-on-one interactions were essential to the design proposals. And specifically, this is also something that I really enjoy, or I found out that I very enjoy being on ground and talking to communities and sharing with them with the design, hearing what they want. And yeah.
That's really nice. Will you want to share with us about one or two of your projects?
Yes. Okay, so this one is a temporary chapel that was placed in a parking lot in Colombia in the middle of the pandemic for a senior community residing in the city of Bogotá. I think it's one of my favorite projects in terms of aesthetics and also form. This project was done in collaboration with GB Urban Studio and also the Colombian Society of Architects as well. And this project essentially started because I was already participating in some of these pandemic interventions through the city. But as Easter celebrations were coming up, I was very interested to see if somebody could be, or somebody wanted a space for prayer during this time, specifically outdoors. So we started reaching out, me and my previous business partner, we started reaching out to different institutions of the city that were in charge of managing churches. And then we got in touch with a specific place called Santa Maria de la Alhambra. That's around this neighborhood. That was a community of seniors that, of course, seniors are very religious. And even though there's a pandemic going on, they will want to go outside and pray. So they were currently inhabiting this parking lot without the chapel, and with the sun, the rain, everything else. So we talked to the pastor of the specific church, and we managed to like get the project and get the rental of the parking lot for only for 4 days, which was, in my opinion, a very interesting design challenge. To put up a 3,000 square feet or 300 square meters building for only 4 days was an interesting part. So we recycled, again, following the same logic of the pandemic of recycling materials because it's economically accessible. We recycled the system that is used to cast concrete slabs, that it's kind of a scaffolding, but only in a horizontal manner. And usually, because concrete starts out in liquid form and then it transforms into something more solid. Definitely, it was the most appropriate material for the time frame that the project needed. Also, I don't know, in terms of aesthetics of the architecture, it was very easily adopted into this kind of like cruciform shape, and led to a very interesting conceptual plan, although it was, I guess, like the biggest critique that we had as designers. Mostly because the elements are so thin, or the vertical elements are so thin, that there needs to be a lot of cross bracing to create stability, which generates that the actual inhabitable space is half of what the structure needs. And there was a model before it got built, and the project was immensely successful. At the end of the day, we managed to get a company that owned this material to lend us the material for 4 days. So at the end of the day where the project was disassembled, the company kept the material again, and the material went back to its original life cycle, creating a closed sustainability loop, which was great. And atmospherically, I do feel that this project is one of the most successful ones. I feel that a lot of architects try to pursue this type of atmospheres through more sophisticated means, but I like this project a lot because it is a very good testament that low-cost architecture does not mean that it's of a less quality. I think it depends on how strategic you are on the materials that you use. So people who are in need of social spaces do not have to I guess accept that they need a lesser type of architecture. And in this building proved that for sure. Okay, so the next project. So as the pandemic was coming to an end, and I still found very interesting that this like methodology of pandemic architecture. I started to think about where it could be a good place to reapply, and this led me to think that the pandemic was not necessarily, it was a problem. It was a chronic problem. It was not an acute crisis like an earthquake or a tsunami or a hurricane where instant shelters are needed, but it was a long-lasting emergency that led to to a specific type of architectural solution. So analyzing which other types of urban environments have chronic crises led me to understand and analyze informal landscapes in South America, specifically in Bogotá. I don't know if you're aware of what informal landscapes are, but there are located usually at the edges of the urban border, and it happens due to mass migration problems, homelessness, that people take over the land, and then the city starts to develop informally. This means that they don't legally own the land, but still it's a phenomenon that happens every day. I think the most common name that we know of these neighborhoods is as favelas, which is how informal neighborhoods happen in Brazil. So these places live in a state of chronic emergency. And I thought that it was a good idea to reapply the logic of the pandemic during these places. And in this scenario, I contacted an organization led by this guy called Cesar. That was an organization that actively works in these environments with food and water security. And he did tell me that they were wanting to create a prototype for a way to catch or to harvest water in a more sustainable manner. So I started collaborating with them. I also participated with a colleague of mine called Oscar Zamora in terms of the design. And we came to the conclusion that due to the fact that this specific neighborhood was located high up in the mountains and in a tropical landscape, there is a lot of fog present. So we created this fog catcher, which is this little type of tower that is meant to recollect or condensate moisture present in the air and turn it into water for consumption purposes. And also it is in a diagonal fashion just to create kind of a microclimate for greenhouse purposes and also food security. In terms of a material specifically that was refurbished, it was not the case in this project, but it was used in the same logic as scaffolding, like as a lightweight material. And it turned out to be a very good project approach because it was very easy to handle and very easy to build. You can see here that community members were the ones who assembled this, and it was only 4 community members using scissors and knives, and that was it, and some screws. And it was very easily to assemble and then transport to site. And then, of course, these are the images that you can see where no heavy machinery was needed, which is essential during these pro bono projects that are also temporary. This project was not as temporary as the others, but of course, if the owner of the land needs to move or something else happens, the project can easily be disassembled. And this is sort of the aesthetic that the project generated. This is the owner of the fog catcher. And yeah, this project itself, I find it very interesting because other than the fact that of its functional purposes, I was very surprised on the aspects of community empowerment that at the end of the day, it got. When you grow up in informal neighborhoods in Colombia, you're essentially told that you're growing up in the worst place of the city while you're growing up. And that's not necessarily the best energy to have being said at you all the time. These types of small exercises, I realized that it was very valuable for the community to understand that they are also a place where they can have not necessarily sophisticated, but innovation in some sort of way. So it stands out in the landscape of the informal environment in a very interesting manner, and people correlate it as a kind of as a landmark within.
Yeah, I agree. It looks really nice. I love how you, from experiencing the pandemic, you can extract, like, analyze it, dissect it into like a type of architecture and a type of site, and turn it into like solutions to essentially like a larger problem, right? And so I thought it's really, really commendable.
Cool. Thank you.
Lastly, what do you think are some key lessons or what insights you've gained from your experiences, especially in the context of community-focused approach and moving to the future?
I guess what I'm heading for right now is, especially in my research, is understanding or trying to define that this approach to architecture, the way that I interpreted it and started reapplying it in my own informal environment, I am not the only one in the world that is taking some lessons out of the pandemic and reapplying them in their own manners. As an example, in New York, in the Open Streets Restaurants Initiative, where parking lots were turned into restaurants, that wanted it to be a very temporary solution to space, and ended up being wildly successful to the point that the AIA New York is trying to make these more permanent and trying to find ways to make these more permanent. Moreover, I'm currently working with the Cambridge Arts Council, with the city of Cambridge here in Boston, because they are doing an initiative called Shade is Social Justice, which I think is very interesting, the approach that they have. They're addressing inequities in the built environment by proposing very quick, low-cost infrastructures, shading infrastructures for communities that don't have shading spaces in their public realm where they live. Which in my opinion also stems from this, or it's somehow a derivative of the pandemic itself as well. Having a quick, sustainable, economically accessible solution to a chronic problematic. So that is something that I find interesting. So at least this is the reason why I'm currently trying to define this in a more theoretical manner, to define if this is a new architectural typology, or if a new type of architecture was catalyzed during the pandemic. I think it's interesting to see. This is one part, and then the other part in terms of lessons with community engagement. I guess if you want to realize successful community engagement, you have to be very clear with community members that you are not doing this out of an altruistic purpose, or that you're doing this out of the 100% pureness of your heart. I think that narrative is when they don't really trust you. If you come with one of these interventions with a specific purpose, and you also communicate to them, I've identified that you're having this problem. I am a young architect that wants to create a build portfolio. Help me, and then I'll help you. That's when community engagement becomes more successful, in my opinion, because it makes them, well, yeah, it makes them feel more equal, or not necessarily that you're giving them charity. This is something that I found useful, and also community engagement, in my opinion, can't be done via Zoom. You have to be there, you have to see their faces, you have to walk around the site, you have to eat a meal with them. And at the end of the day, it's not necessarily something that I would call homework. I feel that part of the reason why I'm wanting to continue with these proposals, at least for the foreseeable future, is that I find it very, very enjoyable. To go and to meet these people and learn about their lives, their methods. I've met many wonderful people that are incredibly smart, that in my opinion deserve to be in the context that I am more than me. But due to inequities or luck, that's not the case. But point is that I evaluate a lot, and I will continue doing it for the next years of my career.
That's really beautifully said. Yeah, thank you so much for showing us example that architecture is accessible. In essence, it really should be solving problems, and it comes from a need, right? But also, I really love how in doing all this, you also involve the community, Like in the last part you said like about community engagement and like having interactions with them firsthand. I think it's really, really nice because architecture does not only give value to communities, but also it can also learn from them and how it's built and how it's, interacting with them too in real life. So yeah, thank you so much for the reminder and also for our conversation today.
Thank you for having me. So always nice to have an opportunity to share about the work.